Thank you, Emily, and thank you all for coming. Yeah, we look forward to hearing more from you after today's presentation, and we welcome your participation and discussion. Okay, let me see. Am I sharing my screen? Yes, I think I am. Okay. So first, a little bit about my background. So I'm currently a professor in the computer science department at UMass Amherst, where I do research in machine learning and natural language processing. I've also strived to do a lot of service for my community. For example, I've in the past served as a president of the International Machine Learning Society, which runs ICML, the flagship conference in machine learning in our field. But I have quite a varied career. Before that, I was vice president of research and development in a startup company, and before that, a research scientist in industry. And in all of these capacities, I've had a long time interest in building tools that use my research to help accelerate the progress of science. And one of those examples actually goes way back, about 10 years before Google Scholar was launched. I, together with 3 other Carnegie Mellon PhD students, built a service that had many of the same features, that spidered the web for research papers in PDF, using machine learning tools, automatically extracted from those PDFs titles and authors, abstracts and citations, made it all browsable. You can get a sense of the era in which we built these tools based on looking at the browser UI here. You could search over these things and also follow the citation graph. Fast forwarding to 2014, I was talking with my friend Jan LeCun, and we were both together bemoaning the sad state of scientific peer review, maybe especially in computer science and machine learning, where the field was growing so fast. And Jan really felt like many papers were poorly reviewed, rejected out of hand, and not disseminated as soon as they could be, slowing scientific progress. It was also bemoaning the all too frequent hidden bias in reviewing. And so with the main goal of maximizing the rate of progress in science, we together talked about various kinds of more open, fast-moving sharing of scientific ideas. And core to what Jan was proposing in the end is something that's not unrelated to the scenario that was described when we were discussing pre-review earlier in the meeting, separating publishing from reviewing. So putting a paper on a public archive and then letting people self-organize into reviewing entities under whose name the review appears, which could give a stamp of approval. Those may be individuals, as I have the sense it is in pre-review. It could be a very official, long-standing journal. It could also be informal reviewing entities, like a group of machine learning savvy PhD students at at MIT who decide to form a group together and to put their stamps of approval on some papers. And such young groups like that could end up giving stamps of approval that the community finds more useful than some stodgy old journal. Another aspect here is of the idea is that there could be multiple reviewing entities reviewing the same paper. Right now, there's often a one-to-one correspondence between the paper and the entity that gave it its stamp of approval, the journal in which it appears, but there's no reason it needs to be that way. Of course, this kind of openness also gives rise to various kinds of concern. It could lose blind review, there also could be various kinds of biases introduced. With that in mind, we began looking at OpenReview broadly and other fields' views of OpenReview. This is a chart copied from a 2012 publication in computational neuroscience from some researchers who were also very interested in open peer review. They surveyed various prominent researchers in their field, asking them what they thought were the right way to configure open peer review, who should get to see what when. And what the biggest takeaway that I took from this is just the wide diversity of what people think is the right way to do open peer review. And so this very much led us in the midst of my conversation with Jan, in which the conclusion of which was, for a new conference that he was creating that wanted to do some more open peer review, they needed the infrastructure to manage the peer review process, for which I volunteered to organize the creation of that service, which then became OpenReview. How should we design that service? And should we design it to match just the one flavor of peer review that Jan had in mind, or design something much more flexible? And clearly, we decided on the latter. I feel broadly like there is no one definition of open peer review that's suitable to all communities. Different scientific subcommunities have their own cultures, their own notion of the right way to do things, and that not only should we support that diversity, but that it's a moment of sea change in science, and that our communities should be doing more research in the peer review process itself, like sociological research. And that also is something that will require flexibility to allow communities to experiment with different things over time and to measure their impact. So what kinds of flexibility am I talking about? The way I think about this mostly in open peer review is who has access to what information, when, and under what conditions. So what do I mean by this? Like, who could be different, it could be the researchers or the authors, the editors, the action editors, reviewers, the journal subscribers or conference attendees, or the general public. And different levels of visibility of information could be different for all these categories of people. There's also the what, who gets to see the submitted manuscripts before they're accepted? Who gets to see the accepted manuscripts? Who gets to see the peer reviews? Who gets to see comments just by volunteers, not the assigned reviewers? Or in some systems, there are responses from the authors to the reviews. Who gets to see those, etc. Then there are also a lot of questions about who gets to see others' identities. Do we get to see the authors' identities? In computer science, the very broad tradition is that reviewing is double blind. The reviewers do not get to see the names of the authors of the paper. Do people get to see the editors' identities of the reviewers, or the identities of the open commenters? Then there's also when, right? So like, who gets to see what when during the like upon manuscript submission, during the peer review process, after the decision is made, after publication, etc. So so in 2013, this new conference that Jan LeCun had in mind launched, the International Conference on Learning Representation, which is, by the way, now become hugely impactful and is another flagship conference in the field. And we provided OpenReview, an early version of OpenReview provided the services for this conference. And here's how reviewing worked in this conference. Submissions were public immediately upon submission, even before peer review happened. Review consisted of the editors assigning 3 reviewers to each paper, as is traditional in our field. These reviewers can review anonymously, like post their review without their name, or they could also choose to put their name on the review if they wanted. And crucially, the general public, the other reviewers and the authors, oh, sorry, I wasn't getting to that yet. The general public can also review non-anonymously. They could also contribute comments right alongside the reviews. And I'll give an example of a particular juicy case of this in a moment. Okay, now getting to the point I was about to say. The reviews appear publicly as soon as they're entered by the reviewers, so that everyone can see them, not only the authors and the other reviewers, but also the general public. The authors, program chairs, reviewers can also message each other privately. At the end of the reviewing period, the editors make acceptance decisions as usual. And then here also, crucially, all papers and all reviews may remain online. So including the rejected papers remain online with their reviews. Various people were concerned that all sorts of toxic behaviors might arise from such openness. Like, would reviewers be too soft because the reviews would be so open? Or might there be weird flame wars? We found broadly that did not happen. And furthermore, some magical things happen. So here's a paper in the very first conference that was quite theoretical, and it had some assigned reviewers, but this person, Paul Shearer, shown here at the bottom of the screen, was not an assigned reviewer, not really part of the community of this conference, but as a math professor, saw this paper, is actually an expert in the mathematical aspects of the paper, and wrote this gorgeous review saying, well, there seems to be an error in the proof to theorem 3, and here's some ideas about how to fix it. And the authors respond, oh my gosh, thank you for pointing this out. You're absolutely right. And this level of magic and scientific progress would not have happened in a more closed system. So broadly, what are some of our findings after 10 years of open peer review? So we've found that just there's more vigorous reviewing when the review process is open during the review period. There's just high quality dialogue between the authors, the reviewers, and the commenters. And often it's extensive, like 35, 40 comments back and forth amongst the reviewers, amongst the authors. And furthermore, many people report that being able to read through these comments and reviews afterwards can be even more valuable than reading the paper, or equally valuable than reading the paper. Furthermore, we find that even stodgy communities are willing to try small steps of change. So like the Conference on Uncertainty in Artificial Intelligence was understandably reluctant to go to the same level of openness as iClear, but did take a step to allow all the conference reviewers, not just the assigned ones, to see all the other papers and to see their reviews. Thirdly, let's see, the initial versions of iClear went against computer science tradition, and the authors of the paper were visible to everybody upon submission. And this happened because the paper was public also, but we really were concerned about the lack of double-blind review and the possibility of bias coming into the review process by knowing who the authors were. And so in 2018, we made a flying leap into a policy that I didn't imagine that the community would be willing to accept, but they were, and that is that the submissions are posted publicly without the authors' names. They're blind, and the author names will be revealed eventually for both accepted and rejected papers. But and this has been repeated every year since 2018, and the community has come to really appreciate and like this part of the workflow. Some different years, iClear chose to allow open public comments to be given anonymously. We found that that does lead to some trolling, and so we've broadly recommended that often it not be anonymous. And we've also found that there's growing interest in both steps of openness in peer review and the OpenReview platform broadly in computer science, and especially in areas neighboring machine learning. Both to Melissa and my delight and terror, the size of the OpenReview user base and client base has been doubling every year for the past 8 years, and it's been a wild ride. Okay, let me close. Let's see, why is this not? Okay, yeah. So the OpenReview software platform, for which Melissa is the technical lead and the lead architect, has a lot of really nice properties. Foremost on our mind when designing it is that it's configurable. The backend data model consists of a small set of Lego blocks that are widely rearrangeable for extensive configuration and experimentation from closed to open review. It consists of these basic objects, groups for representing groups of people, such as a set of reviewers or program chairs, notes, which are what we call any container for a set of content, from a paper to a reviewer, to a review, to a comment, and then invitations, which actually Emily was showing you earlier. It's like a template for any information entered into the system. There's also an API that's scriptable for defining workflow. The system is scalable. Like a lot of other systems that were used in machine learning previously would crash around the deadline, which in computer science, these conferences may receive 15,000 submissions in, say, a 12-hour period. And OpenReview, thankfully, has been robust to those. And the system is open in many, many ways, including being open source. All right. I think for the sake of time, I'll skip some of these machine learning aspects that are key to further enhancing the OpenReview platform, and turn things over to Melissa. I'll stop sharing. So the OpenReview project is incredibly privileged and grateful. Melissa, I'll let you start screen sharing whenever you
can.
Yeah. Grateful to have Melissa as our technical lead. She already had 10 years of experience in the software industry before joining our project. She both is the lead architect, a hands-on engineer, and is managing the rest of the team. And so I'm very happy to turn this over to her.
Okay,